Hello, this is Jim Schaefer, host and executive producer of Rip Rap, the academic book television program. In this program, we'll be celebrating our 200th program in our 17 years of existence in broadcasting information and interviews about academic books. What you'll notice is that we have some segments from previous programs that we'll be showing in this program celebrating that interaction. The first one will be with Carl Port, who was a major supporter when I was trying to get this program together. The program that we're going to be showing is when he was closing his Shaman Drum bookstore, and it was actually on the last day of that store's existence. And I did an interview with Carl in the store. Hello, this is Jim Schaefer, executive producer and host of Rip Rap, the academic book television program. We have a special program today where we have our guest is Carl Port, still with Shaman Drum bookstore as of today.
Yeah, the rest of the day.
Yeah. And so we wanted to talk with Carl about this, as you say, long run with the bookstore. How did you come up with the idea?
Well, 29 years ago. It's hard to remember back that far. But I'd worked in the book business in the past, and I figure I've been selling books now for 35 years. And I've owned the bookshop for 29 years. But I was always, Ann Arbor is a great, as you know, having done this for Rip Rap for 12 years, Ann Arbor is a great book town. So I figured any place in the United States that could, would support an academic and scholarly bookshop in the humanities, that Ann Arbor could do that. And it did. Had a long, good run.
So when you started, it wasn't exactly this big of a space.
No, I had 2 rooms on the second floor. And there had been a bookshop there called Paideia Books. And I managed that in the last maybe 6 months of its existence. It was a very good bookshop, more scholarly than Shaman Drum Bookshop is, and specialized in a lot of, say, E.J. Brill titles that were printed in the Netherlands, extremely expensive books. That was very interesting to be part of that experience. And then I started my bookshop in the location 2 rooms upstairs in 1980. Did that for a number of years and gradually took over more rooms upstairs and eventually moved downstairs and occupied, in essence, the entire building.
You got the space.
Yep, got the space.
So why did you decide to concentrate on the humanities?
Oh, because, it's very self-indulgent. I wanted to have a kind of bookshop that would knock my socks off if I went into it. And there's a couple of ways that you can market. You can market anything. One is to sort of do an analysis of the community that you're part of, and then try to meet the needs of the community. Another way to do this, and an edgier, maybe more interesting way, is to try to inform the community what you think they need. And I sort of tried to do both in the last 29 years.
It's been very interesting. I mean, we're sitting right now in the spot where you had the different author events. Mm-hmm. And what were some of your favorite? I know you had so many. I mean, it seems like millions looking back. But what were some of the highlights?
We had maybe over 250 a year, I think, something like that. We had a lot of academic and people who published books here at the university, and we'd do parties for them, and then also events in the evening, writers who were coming through. And Allen Ginsberg was here a number of times. Poet Gary Snyder was here a number of times. Patti Smith came once, as well as a number of wonderful poets and writers over the years. And so it's just been a great run to bring these people here and then let the community in Ann Arbor have a chance to see them up close and to talk to writers and poets and artists over the years. So it's been I tell people that I had the opportunity to sell good books to smart people for 29 years, and that one could do much worse with one's life.
Well, and some of the events you had outgrew the space you had in the bookstore.
We had this spring we did a party for Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn, and I know that you interviewed them for the Rip Rap series, and we did that at the Hatcher Library. Had an event for them, and that was extremely interesting.
Standing room only, too.
That's right.
I mean,
That's
that
right.
was so packed, they actually had people outside the doors who still wanted to come in.
Right. Number of security people from the University of Michigan were there to apparently who felt that this was still that the issues that these folks represented were still volatile in this culture, but it was a wonderful chance to interact with these folks who had, actually, Bill spent a lot of time in Ann Arbor when he was a younger person, and over the years he's also, he and Bernadine Dorn have also shopped a lot here and supported the store, which I deeply appreciate. And then this spring, I think it was during the month of April, the poet Ernesto Cardenal did a reading at the Hatcher Library. And I had been in, Cardenal was Minister of Culture in the Sandinista government and is now on the outs with Daniel Ortega. But I met him in Nicaragua in January, and one of the people in the delegation I was with invited him to come to Ann Arbor, and magically enough it worked out. And Cardenal is now 84 and is probably the preeminent poet in Latin America these days. He's in his, I think, 83 years old and still getting out and around. So that was a wonderful reading, and that was also probably 250, 300 people there. So this is a community that values the life of the mind, and people turn up for events like that.
Well, and speaking of community, there's a number of things you've been doing over the years that were in the wider community, not locally, but the state and national level. Maybe one of them that maybe now people associate is, the different associations like the State Street and...
Also the Downtown Development Authority here in Ann Arbor, and I served on that proudly for a number of years. And one of the most interesting experiences I had there was, I recall we were working on the parking structure, or doing the reworking the parking structure on 4th and William Street. And I was at this meeting at 8 o'clock in the morning, and engineers were doing this presentation to us about bricks. And we're talking about the relative porousness and the glazes on bricks. And we were presented with a number of bricks to look at. And in the middle of this meeting, I thought, I'd never in my life expected to be at, hearing a presentation like this. And I realized that the same issues that one brings to, say, doing a close textual analysis of a poem are the same sorts of things that you bring to looking at what's the best brick to use on a parking structure. So it's been an interesting and wonderful run here in Ann Arbor.
And then there's the Great Lakes Alliance.
A couple of years ago, I sort of saw this coming, the kind of crisis in the culture right now. And I don't think the idea, the way that we've conceived of bookshops really works very well for anybody anymore. Um, so the question that we should all be asking ourselves is, what's the next iteration of the bookshop? And I'm talking now about, I don't think it works very well for independent bookstores or also for chain bookstores. And this is as a result of the drift of people to the internet to buy books. And so I'm not sure how to fix this. And I think that this is thinking about the bookshop of the future, that's going to be a kind of community collaborative.
The next program segment that we have is with Ann Stoler, one of my favorite authors, an interview on her book on colonialism and empire. Here's that segment. I noticed that for an author whose book focuses so closely on intimate relationships, it was interesting how you acknowledged the impact and support of family and friends, even dedicating it to your mother, sister, and a friend.
This is a book that I would have dedicated to them, sort of no matter what the subject was. All of them had died within 5 years of one another. And all of them were sort of an inspiration in different sorts of way. Political inspiration, my dearest, oldest friend, Joanne. Sort of aesthetic, literary inspiration, my sister. And a sort of emotional intensity of my mother. But they would have been there in any case because they were so forceful and sort of present in my life while I was writing this.
I thought it was interesting because it evoked that whole issue of intimacy and relationships and how people influence each other across that in those ways.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
As we begin a more detailed discussion of this book, Carnal Knowledge and Imperial Power, and its study of Dutch colonialism in the Javanese heartland of colonial Indonesia and in the Delhi of northern Sumatra, perhaps you'd explain why you embarked on this project, how you formed your strategies for research, what archives did you find helpful, and why did you decide to use colonial photographs as a visual counterpoint to textual discourses and practices analyzed?
Well, that question alone could take me hours to answer. But in a way, this is a strange book because I didn't ever really mean to embark upon it. It was not something I said, I'm going to write a book now. I had started, I should probably start back where it emerged from and its genealogy. I had done my dissertation work in Sumatra and I was working on a labor history of multinationals. And I was just incredibly impressed with the extent to which issues around labor strategies, labor management, were over and over again about the intimate. Were over and over again about controlling those people who worked on those estates who were Javanese, but those people who were also the European employers on them. And it struck me, sort of a child of 68, a Vietnam War baby, someone who was honed on Marxism and feminism, that so much of what we did as scholars was study history from the bottom up. I mean, that was de rigueur. That was what you did. That was what you were supposed to do. And for my generation, we almost avoided looking at history from the top down. It was sort of not cool to be doing. It was not what you did. And it seemed very strange. There was some dissonance there. If we were so concerned with questions of power, of capitalism, of empire, of colonialism, why is it that we could only study those who are being oppressed by it in some ways, and also assume that the only people being oppressed by it were those who were colonized?
Chicago, on his book, Public Enemy, which is a completely ironic title because he was not a public enemy at all. But this segment shows how he felt when his name came up during the 2008 presidential debate, and then later when he was at Grant Park in Chicago after Barack Obama had won the U.S. presidency. Here's that segment. this is an enjoyable book. I really like reading it. But as I told you, I'd like to talk about the end first,
Okay.
because there's that scene in the Grant Park that's just marvelous, and I think that also is a way of introducing the different struggles that you've had along the way. So,
Want me to tell you about that scene?
yeah, really.
Read anything?
No, just talk.
Well, you know, we were caught up in the 2008 campaign. I was made into a kind of a caricature to try to bring down candidate Senator Obama. And of course it backfired, it didn't work, so Obama was elected. And the afterward ends in Grant Park in 2008, in November, I think it was November 4th, when Obama is elected president. And we had gone to my brother's house. My brother was a Democratic Party activist and had campaigned in several states, and his friends were there, and they were all ecstatic. And then we went over to our closer comrades' house, Barbara Ransby and Peter Sporn, who were part of, you know, our anti-war, anti-imperialist kind of collective in Chicago. And there the tone was decidedly more sober and subdued, but nonetheless, the excitement was palpable. Bernie and I couldn't resist. I mean, the way I think I said it there is, there was nobody inclined to dance in the streets, but Bernie and I felt like we wanted to dance in the streets because we'd endured this long 8 years of Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld. That was a lot. And then we'd endured this 4-month political campaign in which we'd gotten kind of caught in the middle of it inadvertently. And we wanted to go downtown when it was clear that it was over and celebrate. And when we got there, it was an extraordinary scene. It felt like there were 1 million people pouring in from all sides. And I got just caught up in it. I had no illusions about the election of a president, and I can explain that to you. But I have no sense that the way social change really happens is through electoral politics. I think electoral politics are not only corrupt, but they also, if they ever do anything positive, it's tailing after social movements. It's not leading them. And so, you know, in my estimation, Lyndon Johnson, who passed the most far-reaching civil rights legislation since Reconstruction, was never part of the Black Freedom Movement. And FDR was never part of the labor movement. And Abraham Lincoln never belonged to an abolitionist party. And yet those three presidents, their greatness is based on these social movements that more or less forced them to do the right thing at the right time. So my politics are in the street. My politics are not in the electoral arena. But nonetheless, without illusions, there was something, you know, magisterial about that night. And I wanted to be there. I wanted to witness it. And when we got there, we got caught up in the crowd, and the sight was beyond exciting. I was ecstatic. Not because I thought that President Obama would bring the change that I believe in, peace, justice, you know, racial fairness, economic justice. I didn't think that. But what I did think is that 8 years of a really dark, dark cloud was passing. People were excited. This was a blow against white supremacy for this country, with this history, to elect an African American to the highest office in the land. It was something, and I wanted to witness it. I burst into tears that night 4 times. First, just seeing the crowd. It was the crowd. The way I felt that night was, I know this isn't going to last, but these are the people I want to be with. This is the world I want to live in. It was a feeling of joy, not anger, generosity, not revenge. Black and white, Latino, Asian, all of us together, young and old. And so the scenes that were big in my mind were things like an African-American grandmother in a wheelchair waving a big American flag, a young black man with his kid on his shoulders saying, I wanted her to witness this so that 50 years from now she can say she was here. And then, you know, a young Latino police officer dancing with an older white woman. I mean, those things, you know, that's the world I want to live in. I know it's not the world we have, but for that night it was a possible world. That was the fun of it. I burst into tears when I found the exact spot where 40 years earlier I'd been beaten and dragged off to jail during the Democratic Convention of 1968. And then when the first family came out, it was a very moving moment to see Lake Michigan and the brilliant starry sky behind, and to have this young, beautiful family stand up and say, yes, we are here, and we're here for you. I was the last person kicked out of the park that night, I think. I lingered, and I think we left the park about 2 in the morning. Again, I say all that, I paint that picture for you, but without any illusion that he would change the world for us. In fact, I remember saying that night, he can't save us, but with a little luck, we could save him. And that's how I see politics. I think we spend too much time staring at the sites of power we have no access to, like the White House, and too little time looking at the sites of power we have absolute access to, like the street, the workplace, the community. And that was all there that night, all in my heart, in my consciousness.
I was wondering when you were going to ask me why the book was called The Martian's Daughter. And it's not because I think it might accidentally capture a few science fiction fans, but it's because there were 5 Hungarian scientists, of whom my father was one, who were called the Martians. And the story goes, and I can't personally vouch for it, was that one night a number of the people who were working on the Manhattan Project were sitting on top of the mountain in Los Alamos, drinking beer and talking, and they weren't allowed to leave, so there wasn't much to do in the evening, so they were kind of killing time. And one of them said, how come that so many of the geniuses associated with this project come from this little country that nobody can find on a map called Hungary? And somebody else said, well, the truth is, they're not really human beings at all. They're Martians. But in order to disguise the fact that they come from Mars, they all speak Hungarian.
But there was a very interesting thread about this formative aspects of the relationship between father and daughter. I mean, you know, he was just an absolute genius. I don't think there's any other way to look at it. You know, what he did with his life and what he did and developed himself was just extraordinary.
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, he invented game theory. He was one of the pioneers of the modern computer. In fact, the architecture of the computers that you and I have on our desk is called the von Neumann architecture. And he was a leading force in the Manhattan Project. And in a way, I spent my whole life trying to get out from under the shadow of a larger-than-life parent. And many people who've had such powerful figures as parents say the same thing. And my mother was no slouch either, in a very different way. She was, she had kind of made up her own career as she went along. She was a pioneer too in some ways. She went to work during World War II as a Tilly the Toiler, and within 6 months she was running the whole training program for women building radar sets. And she was very glamorous, very tempestuous, could charm a room full of people. And I think she sort of felt I was her ugly duckling. And so my father had a certain set of expectations, and my mother had a certain set of expectations, and society had a set of expectations, which is that I would be a good wife and mother and use my first-class education to pass things on to my children. And then I had my expectations. And in a way, my life story was somehow bringing these all together.
Before we end this program, I want to give thanks for the many people involved with this program over the 17 years that we've existed. One of them is my wife, Karen Schaefer, who's acted as executive director, and so she's had to contend with all the different technology issues we've come up with in terms of cameras and tape and sound and all that stuff. I also want to thank Randy Beyer, who's been a co-host on many programs where we've discussed a huge amount of books over the years. Randy Beyer is a professor of at Eastern Michigan University at Halley Library. I also want to mention Susan Douglas, who's the chair of the communications department at the University of Michigan, and she has provided a way for us to receive a sponsorship of sorts at the university so that we could, have an email presence, and we deeply appreciated that. Another group of people who have helped us have been the Community Television Network, which has been involved with us from the beginning. And that's where I received my initial training on how to do video taping and editing and producing. And among those are Craig and Mike. Craig schedules the program and Mike oversees the technical side. We also want to mention our family members who've been helping us from time to time over the years, including Patrick, Ted, Dan, and Marie, and their help. We'd also like to thank the publishers who've sent us books for discussion, including Duke University Press and Johns Hopkins and others, including University of Michigan Press. And we also like to thank all our guests for their willingness to participate in being interviewed on the program. It's not easy to do that, and we appreciate them willing to put themselves into the public space. So thank you for watching, and look for more programs in the future.